I'd like to now introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Michael Sherraden, who is the recipient of the 2015 Richard Lodge Prize. Dr. Michael Sherraden is the George Warren Brown Distinguished University Professor at Washington University in St. Louis, and the founding director of the Center for Social Innovation. Dr. Sherraden is a real rock star in the social work profession and is recognized for his pioneer work in the area of asset building and addressing poverty, family, and community development, and his transformative contributions to social policy and social work practice both domestically and internationally. We're really honored to have him here today. In 2010, Time magazine recognized his work by naming him one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Other people on the list was former President Bill Clinton, President Barack Obama, Elton John, Lady Gaga, and Prince. So he's not only a rock star in social work, he was sat among all the other rock stars as well. So that certainly is rock star status as far as I'm concerned. Personally, I have enormous respect and admiration for Dr. Sherraden professionally. In addition to his enormous contributions to policy and social innovation, I have witnessed over years his generosity in terms of mentoring a whole generation of scholars, policymakers, in terms of their professional growth and development. There's a lot of Michael Sherraden mentees all over the world, and several in this room as well, and that speaks volumes for a person. The other thing about Michael is that he's amazingly humble and gracious as a person. And finally, he's proud to call himself a social worker. And so he's amidst all of us today who are social workers, so we should just congratulate ourselves because we may call ourselves clinicians, private practitioners, all these other words, but our hearts and values should be in social work. So let's applaud the profession of social work as well. So in many ways, it's a real honor and privilege that he is here today and as our keynote speaker and the Lodge Prize recipient. The title of his talk is Social Innovation, Shifting the Shape of Knowledge into Action. Before giving his talk, where there will also be an opportunity to ask questions afterwards, I would like to formally acknowledge the Lodge Prize to him. We actually have a plaque, but it's on its way here. So I don't think that, at least we got him here, the plaque is almost here. But I would like to tell you a little bit about the prize itself. The prize is named for the late Dr. Richard Lodge, whose illustrious career ended too early as he died at the age of 61. Dr. Lodge received his MSW from the University of Pittsburgh in 1950 and became a social worker, administrator, and supervisor at a variety of group work agencies. So like a lot of you, he was a practitioner in the field. In 1955, he joined the faculty of University of Pennsylvania, where he received his doctorate. In 1966, he became the dean of the Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond. He then went on to become the executive director of the Council on Social Work Education. The real honor and pleasure about Adelphi is in 1978, he joined us as faculty and focused his teaching in the doctoral program in courses around theory building and published numerous articles in social work education. Adelphi University's social work doctoral program was one of the few beginning programs in the country. The Lodge Prize was established in 1985 to recognize individuals who have made outstanding contributions to the development of social work theory. In his many roles in the profession, Dr. Lodge brought an inspired and appreciation for our profession and dynamic creativity to problem solving. And I believe that Dr. Lodge would be pleased that this year's prize award was given to Dr. Michael Sherraden, because the values and the work that Dr. Lodge has done, Dr. Sherraden has taken it exponentially. So at this moment, I'd like to bring him to the podium for his talk and to give him a round of applause for this honor.
Thanks so much, Dean Safier. It's a great pleasure to be here.
It's connected.
Okay. Oh, you hear me now. Okay, good. It's really a great pleasure to be here. I was reflecting while Andy was speaking that I would rather have an award from social workers than from Time Magazine. It's like Time Magazine is a little bit arbitrary, but social workers are this is the community that I belong to, and I'm delighted to be here to receive. There really aren't that many awards for social workers, I think. So I'm standing in for all of us that are working hard and recognizing that social work really matters, and maybe we can reflect on that a little bit today. My remarks today will be about social innovation, and I've been thinking it's kind of a trendy word, so I have to be a little careful with it. Trendy words come and go, or trendy phrases come and go, but I mean social innovation as social practice, and I will try to speak in terms of what practice is and what I'm an academic. I have one foot very much anchored in the world all the time, but I'm a university person, so I'm not practicing day to day in the way that many of you are in the room, but I don't really draw a sharp distinction between these roles. And I was given the information about Richard Lodge and this speech or this prize and what the speech should emphasize. And the early interpretation was that it should emphasize theory building and epistemology, and epistemology kind of philosophy of knowledge building. So that sounds a little wonky, but I don't think it really has to be wonky. I don't think about it that way. So we'll talk about that too, because I want to make some comments about how we go about our work, both as scholars or applied scholars and as practitioners, and I think that really applies to all of us. I think in many ways doing practice is really knowledge building. You're learning about what you're doing. You have ideas about it. You have ideas about how you can do it better. You try to do it better next time. You take information back from that, and then improve your practice. I view all of that as innovation. That really, the nature of social practice and social work really is a constant process of renewal and innovation. And if we're good at it, we learn systematically so we can continue to do better. But that requires paying attention and learning about it. So it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be with the alumni and friends of Adelphi University. As Andy said, I have a couple former doctoral students at least on the faculty here, and it's Jerry Kagotho's here, Philip Rosario is here. These are wonderful younger scholars who are making important contribution. We're proud to have this association with Adelphi. My talk today, I actually wrote out an essay for this talk, but I won't read it because that's too boring to do. So I'm just going to talk with you. And these are ideas that I'm thinking through, so I'll appreciate your feedback about this. There'll be time for question and answer, and I'll appreciate your thoughts, and I'll appreciate your hard questions and your criticisms too. So we'll leave time for that discussion today. Let me say that let me begin by saying that I think this idea of social practice or social innovation has at least four main components that are really important to emphasize. And the first is, and Andy and I had a really great talk at dinner last night about social work and the future of social work and what is good social work and how can the profession move forward. So the first point very much relates to that conversation, which is that all of this needs to be embedded in the world. I'll come back to that point a little bit later in this talk because there's a kind of an epistemology point to make about that. But this is really the common language that we could use about it. It needs to be embedded in the world. This social work happens in the world, so the work that we do, the learning that we do, really needs to be foremost embedded in the world. I make that point because sometimes social work scholarship. Of course, all of you practitioners are in the world doing work day in and day out. but some of the social work scholarship sometimes a little removed from that. And actually there's a tension there that maybe is not the most desirable tension to have, that probably a lot more of our social work scholarship should start with an anchor in the world with a question of basically what's going on out here and what questions do people need to have answers to. And that really, in my view, is the kind of bedrock starting position for social work scholarship. And then I think there's a creative process in there, and sometimes we get a little bit stuck on the creative process or lack of it, because it's very easy to go on day to day, doing what we did yesterday, and especially many of you may work in situations that are just not that easy. The work may be difficult, resources may be tight in the agencies that you work in. There may be a lot of rules that somebody else has made up that are not always, the most productive for the job you're trying to do. So it's hard to work all these things out. It's relatively easy to get a bit bogged down in that and to get a little bit worn out, and sometimes people get burned out, is the occupational phrase, and not able to do their job in a creative way. So this requires all of us, and I think this is true for all of us, a kind of continual renewal, and maybe days like this play a small part in that. For those of you who can step away from your practice and think about something else and meet some of your colleagues and have a little bit different conversation, I think these processes are essential for that. But there's a cognitive process here that also is really essential. I think that the idea of renewing practice or renewing knowledge and creating innovations really requires a creative response to the conditions when they're not going well. And I want to make that point really explicitly, that it's when social policies are not doing what we intended them to do, then we need to think, well, what's possible to do in this situation? Given the same resources, what's possible to do that could be very different? And I'll come back to that point as well. So there's this, and I really think what that requires at that step is a pretty strong analysis and a pretty strong visioning of what we think a better situation would be. And that sometimes not that easy to do that when you're working day to day, and there are a million pressures not to think that way, because nobody in the organization wants you to think about doing something different, because that will disrupt how things are going, and so on. Believe me, no one in public policy wants to hear a different idea either. If you put a different idea on the table, you will be, this is just not the way we do things, and it will be very easy to dismiss that, and it will be very easy to be discouraged by that. That happens to all of us all the time. But if we want to make change, then I think a vision, it's really essential to have a vision about what those new circumstances might be. The third thing is important, I think, is that we have to begin to create those changes and get evidence about whether they work or not. So in your practice, and this is true for us in the university in our research, we have to set up conditions where we can see if a different way of doing things might be better. So that's always hard to work out. In your practice, you'll be told there isn't time for that. In my job as a researcher, if you're visioning something that's new, there's no funding stream for that. I mean, almost by definition, there's not a pocket of money that is going to support that work. So we're all in the position of, okay, we need to test this in the best way we can, find a way to see if doing it a different way works, and begin to model that. At that point in my career, I've found that if you're able to get even beginning evidence about a different way of doing something, and this is the key, and comes from directly related to my conversation with Andy last evening. If this vision of doing something new is deeply embedded in practice, and you have evidence that you can do it a little bit better, there will be interest in what you found. So I know it's a kind of leap of faith to believe that, but that's really the way the world works. I have not in my in my career found that research evidence is ignored. And a lot of times in the university we hear the phrase, oh, you do research and you write it in a journal article and it goes up on the shelf and it collects dust up there. These are very common kinds of metaphors for the academic enterprise. This is not at all the experience of my professional career. Whenever we've addressed an issue that was a sincere, a real issue in the world, and we had reason to think it might work better a different way, and we've tested that knowledge, even if it's a small amount of evidence to begin with, that knowledge can create interest that can be built upon. And I think that's a really key, this is evidence-based practice, maybe on the kind of innovation side, but that really can work. Sometimes I've been amazed at how well that's working. To give you one example, we've been testing universal accounts at birth for children in the United States and actually in some other countries as well. And we've run an experiment in Oklahoma since about 2005, giving newborn babies an account at birth and with a treatment and control group. This is a very long project. It's taken us a long time to gather this evidence, but we have very promising results from these kids. These kids are doing better. Their mothers have a better outlook for their education. Their mothers have a little bit improved mental health. The kids have better social emotional development. We have very good evidence about this now. And during the past year, we've had 3 states, Maine and Nevada and Rhode Island, and working now also in Vermont and Illinois and a couple other states. We've had 3 states that have enacted universal accounts for children at birth. And really as a direct result of having some evidence that this can be successful. Relatively small investments compared to other childhood interventions, but very positive empirical payoffs so far for how these kids are doing and what their futures look like. So this is not pie in the sky. This is work that really does happen. Our goal for this project is every kid in the country has an account when they're born. And again, that's a little ambitious, but it's kind of within reach because we have evidence now, and we've got a bunch of states that are starting to model this, and states will learn from other states. So it's possible to initiate changes and to make changes spread if you have a strategy. And again, I would emphasize that it has to be started by being embedded in the world. It has to then create a different idea about what can happen, and then that has to be implemented. So the vision of this relates to the larger project that we have at the Center for Social Development on asset building, and it relates also to resources, because I have so many points to make here. I'll get around to them all. So the issue with asset building is that we have tax policies that have supported lots of people at middle income and above. So this is really my first observation, 20 some years ago about these policy conditions. So we have through the tax systems large subsidies for having retirement accounts, large subsidies for owning homes, and large subsidies in several other areas. Altogether, these tax subsidies for owning assets at the household level are probably approaching about half a trillion dollars a year. In other words, $400 or $500 billion a year. These are not small expenditures; they're large, but this money is all regressive. It all goes to the top half of the income distribution. I get my share of it. Many of you who have retirement accounts in your jobs get your portion of it. Those of you who have homes and a mortgage are getting benefits from this. So this is public policy that's transferring resources to the top. In other words, the government is participating in generating inequality. This is just the facts. These facts are not well discussed. They're becoming more discussed over the last 10 or 20 years, and more discussed now that inequality is rising. But these facts represent an opportunity, which is that we are spending several $100 billion a year for asset accumulation, and it's going from the whole population to the top. By any by any reasoning, this is bad public policy. There's no possible way to justify a government that is taking resources from the whole population and shifting them toward the top. So this public policy should be addressed. So that was the impetus for thinking about asset accumulation for the whole population. So as one, this has been a long journey for me. We've and I won't go into all of that, but we're really arriving back at the idea that I proposed in 1991, which is that we should start everybody with an account, and we should use public policy to build those accounts so that all people over time are able to accumulate assets that they can invest in their future, for their education, perhaps in career training, perhaps in a home, and eventually it could help support their retirement security. This is not a statement about getting rid of the existing Social Security system, which is terrific. Also a creation of social workers. You should all be very proud of that. Largely social workers who were instrumental in the 1930s in creating Social Security. The most amazing public policy in the last 80 years, and I would guess probably the most amazing public policy for the next 80 years. So that's a social work creation that those social workers saw was possible to do in their time. So I'll come back to this point. So anyway, we have this situation where resources are being shifted to the top, and it wasn't hard for me at that time to say, well, gosh, not everybody has these accounts. Why don't we think about using this resource? These resources exist now. It's not like we have to allocate new money. This is happening already. Why don't we think about allocating these resources to everyone? So now that, politically that's a little bit harder thing to do, but at least it gives you, if you see this situation clearly, it gives you a reason to put something on the table. And now we have in fact demonstrated in the experiment in Oklahoma that we can get 100% participation of the population. This is no small point either. That is, we can create a policy structure that brings everyone in. Everyone. We had in Oklahoma, out of 1,361 treatment mothers, we had only one mother decline this account for her child. She's a Muslim, and her religious interpretation was that having an account that accumulated earnings was against Sharia law. Muslims have different views about that, but it would be possible to solve that problem because there's a lot of innovations happening in Islamic finance. So there are ways to deal with that issue, that particular issue. So in general, we got 99.9% of the treatment population to have an account. These kids still have this account 8 years later. So it's possible to set up an inclusive policy system. That's an innovation, right? It didn't exist before, and we're setting it up. And because we were able to do that, and because these kids are now demonstrably a little better off than the treatment kids or the control kids, then we're able to talk to several other states about doing the same thing. So that's a kind of it's sort of like issue out there. What's a vision for doing it differently? Get some evidence that if you do it differently, it can have positive effects, and then use the evidence to change the policy and practice. Those are the steps that are required, as far as I know, to get something done in the world. And that can be done at a national policy level. It can be done at a state policy level. It can be done in a program in your community. There's really not there's no boundaries on where you can go after this. And I guess also it's important to say we live in a pretty difficult time in terms of resources for the work that we would all like to do. We've got a federal government where one party wants to cut government as much as possible, cut spending for government as much as possible. At least, I think that's pretty selective what they want to cut. But they certainly want to cut resources to the populations that we all care about. But also a government that doesn't really function very well in terms of decision making, even if it's bad decisions, they have a hard time making even bad decisions. So we live in a difficult time. It's not it's easy to get discouraged by that. I think it would be, it's not that helpful to get discouraged, not that easy to live through times like this. But one other thought that I would like to leave with you today is that these kinds of times that we live in are not, well, I'll say two things about this. One is, in many, and I have a good friend at the Urban Institute, Gene Sterling. Gene is, and some of you may know Gene, Gene's a kind of national treasure in terms of public finance. He thinks about public finance in terms of the political and social effects of public finance. And basically, Gene's point is that we live in a time when, by any economic measure, we've never been so well off. We have more resources than any generation ahead of us. It's true we've been through a few years where we've had recessions and difficulties, but the average household in America, and certainly in terms of the whole economy, actually the distribution is a little bad at the bottom, so I'll take that last sentence back. In terms of the whole economy, there has never been so many resources to work with. Now, the way we have chosen to work with them is not that constructive. And Gene's point will be that because of locking in expenditures over a long period of time, we don't really have much flexibility in the current governance structure. But the innovative approach to that would be that, well, I think Gene is right about this. We have to think in terms of long-term commitments in federal spending that are locked in and are not available for redistribution. And Gene's point would be that basically that $6 or $7, depends how you do the arithmetic, $6 or $7 per older adult compared to per child is spent in the federal budget. So we're making large investments in the older population now, and we make really terrible, pitiful investments in our children. So this is probably not a good way to run the country. So those of us who are getting older might politically resist that, but there probably does need to be some different vision about how we structure public finance and public policy that goes to the top. So, there are some relatively easy fixes here. Social Security system, I love the Social Security system, but people who are, I don't know why all of people's income is not taxed to go into it. I mean, there are a bunch of things that just seem reasonable to me. If you're earning above the maximum limit in Social Security for taxation, bumping that up a lot or bumping it up to your full income doesn't seem like at all an unreasonable idea. It's a social idea. If you're lucky enough to have that much income, then perhaps the whole country can benefit from it, especially the next generation. So this is a longer conversation, but the point here is that you should not, even though times are difficult, and times always seem difficult, and there are more resources available in this economy and in the world that you live in than there ever have been before, but we have to figure out how to reallocate resources so they benefit the populations that we care about, whatever those populations are. So it's a matter of kind of busting out of a mindset that things are not possible. Maybe we're at a time a little bit like the progressive era in about 100 years ago, a little more than 100 years ago, in the early 20th century, really the era that social work came out of, an era when Jane Addams was and other women were in Hull House, people like William James were writing, and John Dewey, an era when lots of social policy initiatives began that later actually became institutionalized in kind of the welfare policies, especially during the 1930s that we live with today. So it was a very fertile period. It came out of a time of equal discouragement, very deep recession in the 1890s. Urbanization happening in the country, a lot of turmoil, people didn't really know what to do, a lot of poverty, and as a response, there was a progressive response to create a different situation, to use our resources differently, and really a lot of the social policy that we've put in place in the last century was a result of that response. So we may, and I'm looking out at this table today, and or this room today, and I see a room full of round tables, and it reminds me of a photograph of the 1909 White House Conference on Children. So this is not the White House, but it's Adelphi, so also important. So in the room, and Teddy Roosevelt was president, and Roosevelt was supportive of this, to his credit. In the room were, like, you know, all the social workers of the day and concerned citizens, and they decided that, and you have to understand the scope of this decision. At the time, orphanage care of children was at its peak in the United States. There were so many kids who were in orphanages, and these were not all kids who didn't have parents. A lot of these kids were dependent children. Basically, that means they might have parents, but their parents couldn't afford to take care of them. So a lot of orphanage care, especially in the late 19th century, early 20th century, was really not true orphans, but dependent children, because there was no way else to care for them. So institutional care of children doesn't have that great a history, you know. So even if you think orphanage could be a good place, they usually turn out not to be a good place. Institutional care, for various reasons, tends to degenerate into such circumstances that are not that constructive for anybody really, but for children and youth in particular. So the social workers at that White House conference you have to recognize the enormity of this decision. They took a decision that orphanage care of children should be stopped. That we should get dependent children. Really, this was kind of the remnants of the poorhouse, right? We used to put a bunch of people in the poorhouse who didn't have resources, and we finally have gotten mostly away from that. I would argue, however, that prisons are a kind of new poorhouse. That's another discussion in America. But at that time, the people in that room took a decision that we should get children out of orphanage care, and they proposed several things, but they proposed mother's aid. That is, that mothers of children who didn't have resources should get some resources so they could take care of their children in, at the time, called outdoor relief. That this was not a concept that existed before. We're talking about welfare now, what's come to be known as welfare. So the first mother's aid laws were passed in Illinois and Missouri in the teens, and in many states thereafter, and eventually in the 1930s created aid to families with children. It was called ADC to begin with. And it became AFDC. It's now the TANF program, and all of you probably have some awareness of what's happened with all that policy. And welfare, along the way, welfare got a bad name, and there's people are still trying to end it and so forth. But the concept of supporting children outside of orphanage care had tremendous positive impact on the development of children. And social workers did this. And the fact that policy over time has then troubled over the next century, and we're dealing with it today, and we're not doing that good a job of it, is another point. All of these children who have not been in orphanage care for a century has made a hugely positive social contribution. It would be hard to estimate the positive impact of that decision and what followed from it. So I bring this up because that was happening during a time when that grew out of a time not dissimilar to the time that you live in today, that things can be very difficult. There can be all kinds of turmoil in society. There can be a vision of kind of no hope about where we go, and no one knows what to do. But during those kinds of times, historically, is when shifts tend to happen. I would hope also that the pendulum of in the United States of moving so far over to the right and being mean to people who are at the bottom in every possible way is probably shifted about as far as it can go. And the next shift ought to be back the other way, where we begin to recognize, and this discussion is happening. This discussion even happening among the economists, lo and behold. That if if we're going to generate people who have very little resources and are not able to raise their children successfully, this is not going to be good for the country. So this idea, what could be a better social work idea than this one? That you know, it's in the nation's interest that our children especially are able to grow up and be functioning and be productive. That's kind of the nation's business. If we can't accomplish that, then the nation doesn't really have a future. And more people are beginning to understand poverty and inequality in these terms. So that's beginning to shift. That kind of perspective and vision is beginning to shift in ways that many of us in the room would find a more constructive environment to work in. Now we have a lot of work to do, and like how do you take that vision and then try to use it and try to establish? I think it's very likely, in fact, that what will come out of the next renewal that many of you will participate in is a very different kind of social work. And I think that's a good thing. I think that the social work that we created in the 20th century in many respects was suited to a 20th century environment, industrial environment. I think it's not accidental that we find ourselves both as a nation really, and including our social services, to be a little bit at sea. That we're not quite sure what's going on. We're not quite sure where this is going. It's not just social workers who have this sense. It's much of the economy and society. That we are entering a very different world in the information age. So far, there are some things about that world that don't look that great, especially for people at the bottom. It's obviously generating inequality. This is happening everywhere in the world. I work in a lot of other countries. This issue is like, this is really happening. So this isn't a U.S. problem. This is a global challenge. So the issue is how can everyone benefit from the productivity in the economy, and how can this is the bottom line. How can even the poorest households be stable and raise their children successfully? That's the business of human beings on the planet. We have to do that well. So right now, that's more in question in many places, including the United States, than it has been in the past, and we have to figure out a way to do that. To tell you the truth, I'm not really getting to my speech yet, but. I hope this is useful. So I think in the past so I would like to hold up some social workers that are my heroes, that people who have done this kind of work in the past. So it helps maybe to have some particular people in mind. My hero list starts with, in this sense, starts with Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells was not a social worker, but she was. She was doing her main work before there was social work, but in the late 19th century. And Ida Wells went around to lynchings in the South. This was during Reconstruction and after Reconstruction, with a lot of repression in the South. Went around to lynchings and documented. She was a social scientist, and not before there was social science field work. She was documenting conditions of lynchings, which were seldom the same as the newspaper accounts. The newspaper accounts had some story about some white woman was raped by some black man, but this turned out to be almost never the case. And most of the time, Ida Wells would document that these lynchings were about property, that a black family and males were almost always the victims of these lynches. A black family would own some property, or maybe had started a business that was productive, and long story short, were killed for it. So this was, and she did this work so effectively that she was able to organize a response to lynchings. And when people in the United States didn't listen, she went to Europe and made this evidence known and create really great. I mean, this is great social work. She organized a response that not not immediately, but certainly began to reduce the use of lynchings, and eventually, I won't say have completely eliminated lynchings in the United States, but they're certainly not in the same numbers that they used to be. So there's a great response, great applied research leading to dealing with a problem that certainly should not have been there. My other social workers on the list, Jane Addams and the women of Hull House were remarkable. These were women, always evidence-based practice, invented a bunch of practices that for especially living in urban environments, for health and welfare, that later became, and protection of children, and labor protections, a bunch of work that, including a bunch of public health work, that eventually became enacted in federal law in the 1920s and 1930s. During the 1930s, Frances Perkins, Secretary of Labor, first female cabinet member, social worker, had a lot to do with creating Social Security. Wilbur Cohen, also a social worker, also a major player in the creation of Social Security. There are buildings in Washington that carry these two social workers' names, and I don't know if social workers even know that the Frances Perkins building where the Labor Department is a social worker. And Wilbur Cohen was Secretary of Health and Education and Welfare, as it was known at the time back in the 1960s. So it's these social workers, Harry Hopkins, who did the Works Progress Administration. I'm a big fan, I'm a student of, I will say, the New Deal public employment programs, responding to massive public unemployment with a federal strategy. Harry Hopkins was the main architect of the WPA. I did my dissertation on the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. So these were active employment policies that we don't hear enough of today. I mean, I don't know why we don't have a Civilian Conservation Corps for the 21st century. There's a lot to do. There's a lot of young people that don't have work. These are discussions that we should have. This should very much be a social work discussion. And then in the 60s. Civil rights movement and the economic development movement in the 60s, and I think about people like Richard Cloward and Whitney Young, other social workers who were leaders in those responses. So these are all people who had always very academic, always very evidence-based, but also always very, 1 foot very strongly in the world, making something happen, using evidence to make something happen. So let me just sort of recount for you, because I would like you to be proud of being a social worker every day. Let me recount for you some of the things that social workers have accomplished in the last century. Social workers, as I began to tell you, social workers are chiefly responsible for deinstitutionalization in the country, and beginning with getting children out of orphanage care in the early part of the century. Later, social workers were very much involved in reducing hospitalization and institutional care of actually a whole bunch of populations that used to be institutionalized, and there used to be institutions for the blind and deaf used much more extensively than they are now. There used to be institutions for epileptics. I mean, a bunch of things that social workers were active in getting all of those populations out of institutional care and into more mainstream society where they're possible that they could fulfill their lives in a very positive way rather than being locked away. So all of that was an enormous contribution. More recently, large reductions in hospitalization for mental health treatment. Now that's a mixed story too, because we've put a lot of people with mental health issues out on the street and haven't given them proper care out on the street. But I don't know about you, but I'm old enough to remember what some of those mental health institutions looked like. I was inside of them 50 years ago, and this is not a place that you would want to have people stay if at all possible. So it's not that there shouldn't be a role for hospitalization, but as many people as possible should be cared for outside, and we haven't done the best job of that either. But it's the fact that they're not institutionalized is overall a contribution. I think social workers are likely to lead there's a growing recognition that locking up millions of people in jails and prisons is not working out very well. The United States quadrupled the number of prisoners it had over the last several decades. We have in prison today a greater portion of our population than any country in the world by far, including China. It ought to be a national embarrassment. A lot of the people who ended up in jails and prisons are there for nonviolent offenses. This is a vast mistake. It's a very complicated mistake. So undoing all of that is going to be enormously difficult. But you have people like as diverse as Hillary Clinton and Rand Paul now taking positions to reverse this mass incarceration. On my faculty, Carrie Pettis-Davis, a young faculty member, is organizing, along with Matt Epperson, University of Chicago, organizing a social worker effort to contribute to the decarceration. My guess is that social workers will have to play a major role in that decarceration because it's a pretty complicated problem. Once you lock people up, you create another problem. So moving people out of jails and prisons gradually and making sure that we don't put so many people in jails and prisons, I think will be an important social work contribution. Social workers have played enormous roles in prevention of social emotional disorders and substance abuse with all kinds of treatment. Social workers have taken the lead in long-term care of the elderly and the disabled. Social workers have taken the lead in end-of-life care. These are really important contributions. They don't get heralded as much as they should. There are other things that could be talked about, but altogether a quite weighty list. These are significant social contributions to the society, and we don't really talk about them. We will give Henry Ford credit for making cars affordable for the whole population, or we will point out that Neil Armstrong went to the moon, but we never say that Francis Perkins and Wilbur Cohen created Social Security. I mean, Social Security is such an important social policy, and it's affecting tens of millions of people every day in a positive way, but we don't credit that. So there are other examples that I could give to you. I think so. We haven't done a good job of recognizing what social workers have done over the past century, and we haven't done a good enough job of recognizing, what we can still be doing and what we are doing, but what we can do even better, especially in difficult times. It might be very important to think about and we may have opportunities arising out of these times. What is it that can be put in place that might be quite different from the way we're doing business now, but could have a long-term contribution? So I hope you're able to think this way. Let me make another comment here. Back to the wonky point. This is a tribute to Richard Lodge. These comments. So I think it really does matter how we think about the philosophy of knowledge, and it's not different from what I've just been saying to you. There is not accidentally, but really in a kind of causal way. There was a very popular American philosophy in the early part of the century called pragmatism. Articulate, not created by William James, but articulated by William James, and Jane Addams was a big part of that discussion, and John Dewey and others, very sort of American pragmatists. And to overly simplify, this is pragmatism, and it's still a quite strong philosophy in the United States and around the world, but maybe not the dominant one. But it has some characteristics that make it very suitable for applied social practice and applied social research. So it's not accidental that all of these Reform era people were pragmatists, because the philosophy is very suited to the work that we all do. And I would just like to put a word in for continuing that emphasis, because the pragmatists thought that truth was not something that you could think up in an ideal way, such as Plato, that there are some ideals out there that represent the truth, and we spend our whole life not not quite living up to them. That kind of. The pragmatist didn't entertain that notion of the truth. What they said was that nor did any other idea about what the truth could be separate from empirical experience. The pragmatist said that what we know is what actually happens in the world. This is a really important point, that what we know is not what we think is ideal or what we think would be a good thing, but what actually happens in the world. And that's the working out of that is really how we build knowledge. It's how we build knowledge that's useful for. Now that idea is a very American idea, I think. This is sometimes called American pragmatism, but it's also a real social work idea. That what we have to go with is that we try things, and if they work, then we can say this is the truth. Oh, excuse me. It's hard to get emotional about epistemological issues, but if this works, then this young man is better off, or this family is better off. That's a truth that we care about. So that's the pragmatist idea, and I think we should all do, and both practitioners and applied researchers should hone that idea and adhere to it as much as possible. I think it's still the most fruitful epistemological guidelines that we have. I would like to also here, and again tipping a hat to Richard Lodge, I think that in the current era we have. There's something I actually have mixed feelings about the Enlightenment and like the age of reason and so on. I mean, I think it's generated a whole lot of wealth and well-being in the world, generated some other issues as well. So it's not, it's also a mixed story. But the story of the Enlightenment is a story of science, and I totally believe in the tools of science. So. And I think sometimes in social work and social work research, we get a little bit too far away from these. So I see a lot of social work research that I'm not quite sure what people are doing. And here, if you have to take the positive parts of what science offers, is that, and I might be kind of old school on this, that this is like deduction really matters. Deduction is the most powerful scientific tool. That means that before we go out in the world to test something, we ought to be specifying a theoretical statement about what we think we're testing. And I see less of that than we should be having, because a lot of times I think applied social researchers do have an idea about what's going on in the world, but they're not disciplined enough to specify that in a way that can be disproven before they go out and do their research. And this is not, how can I say that? It's not a moral issue. This is just inefficient. If we don't specify our hypotheses before we go out to see if they're working. In other words, if I'm giving kids, or not me, but the Ford Foundation in the state of Oklahoma, are giving kids in Oklahoma an account at birth to see how they do, I should have a good reason. I should have a good reason and some clear hypotheses about what will happen to these kids if we do that. And then I might be right and I might be wrong, but at least you move knowledge forward if you specify. If you don't specify, you can be at that business a lot longer time than you would otherwise. So I'll put in a word for deduction. I'll put in a word for, this will not come as a surprise to any of you because you're social workers. I'll put in a word for middle range theory. I think this is the fertile ground that we can operate on. It's the ground of social psychology, institutional sociology, institutional economics. This is the ground of person and the environment in social work language. Middle range theory is that individuals operate in a set of social circumstances, and the reality that they deal with is a combination of their actions and the actions of the circumstances around them. Now on this, I think this is like, This is just the way all of you think. So this is not news to you, but it's news to a lot of people. But this ground, the middle range ground, is the fertile ground for applied social science. This is where we can get knowledge that can change the institutions that people are interacting with. And I think a lot of the way I view the world is that there's sets of institutions, or think of it as policies and programs, however you want to think about it, that affect people and how people are operate in the world in those institutions is really the essence of their well-being, the essence of how the society does also. A word on this. This is, again, many of you will understand this intuitively, but most Americans do not. There are, this idea that social institutions affect behavior, and just to give you the example I just used, if we're giving every child an account at birth, that's a social policy. The policy is doing the behaving. And this is an idea that we need to work with more than we do. The policy is not separate from the individual. The individual is interacting with that policy. But there are times when the social structure is doing more behaving than the individual. And we need to understand that very clearly, because ultimately it's putting in place these social structures where people can do better that is going to be our agenda. That's really still important to work with individuals who are in those structures, but we have to create structures where as many people as possible can do well. And that's kind of hard to get across to people. One way that I try to get, I'm going to quit in a minute because I'm talking too long. One way that I try to get this across is that, before there was plumbing and running water, which is actually quite recent invention in human development, the Romans figured it out and had running water, but then the world forgot about it for the next, 1,500 years and had to get recreated again. But basically, still, that's a relatively short time period for human development. So before there's running water, and I have, my grandparents grew up like this. Before there's running water, you have to. Every household has to find water. You might have if you're lucky, you might have a well, or you might have a stream, or if you're in a very difficult part of the world, you might have to take your bucket out into a muddy puddle somewhere and get whatever water you can find. There are still billions of people in the world who face these water conditions. So, but here, you guys have especially good water in New York. Here, we get up in the morning and we turn on our tap and we get water. And the water is not water that will make us sick. So we now take that completely for granted. But this is the single most important, and that combined with sewage, where the sewage also goes away, this is the single most important public health achievement ever. This has made more people well that have clean water and sewage treatment than everything else that we could probably do to improve their health combined, if we want to talk about illness and life expectancy and so on. So huge achievement. We get up and get our glass of water and brush our teeth every morning, and we don't think about it, right? We don't have to take our bucket out and go find water. We just have it there. It's a huge achievement. Basically, the way I think about this is that this structure has been put in place so that it has made it possible for people to be healthy, and then we can go about with our lives and do something else. Save a lot of time and a lot of money. Now, this idea, we understand that, right? This idea can be applied to a lot of other situations. One that's likely to be coming up, for example, is that cars are going to start to drive themselves. It's pretty hard to imagine that world. Before this happens, it's pretty hard to imagine, the cars are going to drive themselves. I can tell you that in my case, this will be a good thing. You can ask my wife. But humans in general are not that good at driving cars, right? We make a lot of mistakes. So this could happen pretty quickly. Another 10, 20, 30 years, cars will be driving themselves. We'll look back at it and we'll think, how crazy that people would ever have thought they should be driving their cars. Really, that's what but it's hard, before it happens, it's hard to see that. I'll give you another example of this. What I'm talking to you now about is this constant progression of human development over time really begins to create more social institutions that do things for people instead of people having to do them themselves. And this is a good thing. So I'm going to give you another vision, one that almost no one thinks about now. But we work a lot in the financial sector with people in financial products and services. You may know that people of low incomes face a set of financial services that are not very good for them. There'll be check cashers and payday lenders and other kinds of financial and predatory lending practices before the last recession. Still some, tell the truth. So they face a set of financial conditions. They go out in a market to find their financial services. I think this is like taking your bucket in the morning and going out and finding water, and some of that water is not good for you. And that's what's happening to people. There is no reason why financial services, good quality, simple, efficient financial services cannot be delivered to people over the internet that will not make them sick. There's no reason why this can't happen, except that the financial sector now dominates this market. But this is within reach technologically. It makes social sense. I would like to believe that 50 years from now, we'll be in a room like this and people will think, how crazy, what could we have been thinking of that people would go out and try to find their own, second mortgage on the street. So the larger vision is that the long story of human development is that there are more and more social, and because we get smarter, lo and behold, we do. The larger picture is that more and more of the social conditions that people operate in get institutionalized in a way that's productive and successful. We've done this in many other ways in creating rule of law, creating educational institutions. We've done this in so many areas. I'll leave you with this statement, that the sociality of humans is so fundamental. We are so social, and we don't recognize that enough, and we have the social skills to create institutions that can make everyone's life easier and better, and we often do that, and we will continue to do that. So part of our job is to be thinking, well, how can we continue to do that in other spheres? So that's a kind of big idea, but I really think that's the enterprise that we're all engaged in. So little by little, it's hard to see in our day-to-day work that we make progress in this, but we do make progress. And I think that we will continue to make that progress. So part of our job is to nudge that forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
Well, if we didn't feel proud to be a social worker before this morning, we certainly feel proud now. I'd like to give him applause again. And Michael is available for questions when we have a good discussion. People have questions. There's a mic up here. I'm hoping there's mics other places. We have around 10-15 minutes for discussion.
Good morning. I really enjoyed your conversation, especially since I've been thinking of how to be innovative at my agency. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes as social workers, especially when you get into a position of leadership, you are not really encouraged to create waves if you are already being successful at meeting goals. Mm-hmm. And so how would you encourage me to kind of continue to be a rebel in a sense of changing ideas? Because that seems to be the biggest challenge for me.
Well, I think it is a big challenge, and it's easier to be successful in what you're doing, and I'm sure you're very good at it, and you get a lot of credit for that. So there's no reason other than the fact that you care that you would try to do something else, but you do care. So I think it's possible to carve out, and maybe you should be, not really. This is a lesson I had to learn slowly in my own life. Not really necessary to butt heads with people, although sometimes you will, not understand each other perfectly. But it's important to carve out an area where you say to your agency, well, we have a great opportunity. We're doing well and we're proud of it, but we have a great opportunity to try this on the side to see, because we have to think in terms of the long term. We have to think in terms of, well, how are we doing 10 years from now, or how is this population doing? Or can our agency make a contribution that we can learn from and other people can learn from? So put an agenda on the table of trying something out, that you're not saying that what you're doing now is not great. You're affirming that, but still we have to think in the long term. So, and maybe you can put aside enough resources and maybe a half-time position to begin to demonstrate whatever it is that you want to do. So that would be my general strategy. That, you know, you look at it, you think about, in many areas in most businesses, they think you know, they have to keep investing to try out new ideas. They have, you know, capital expenditures to do research over here on something, even though what they have is already working well. So I think the social affairs that we deal with, the social relations, the social services and policies are the same. I think actually we should do a lot more of that than we do, and so carving it out, I think, could be a good strategy.
Good morning, Dr. Sherraden, and thank you for coming. My name is Carol Ann, and I'm actually in the policy sequence at the school. So surprisingly, I have a policy question. And as you were talking, it seems to me that the whole idea of giving money or a savings at birth is really a kind of addressing wealth inequality, which I think is huge. And, you know, those of us who live in New York understand what that means when we look at Levittown, for example, and the people who were able to buy houses there and then fund colleges for their, you know, grandchildren and so forth. But I wonder why wealth inequality as opposed to income inequality, and how do we move from the savings or the money that people accumulate to looking at a set of social circumstances and institutions that those same people interact with. And you mentioned, for example, predatory lending, payday, and so forth. And also I want to mention also, because you talked about it, mass incarceration, and certainly more recently, well, not more recently, but we're paying more attention to it, police violence, especially for men of color. And so people have these savings, but interfacing with institutions that are really in some way going to offset some of what I think you talked about earlier in terms of the goals that you've seen so far. So I wonder if you could talk about both of those things, the institutional part and how to intervene there, and also wealth inequality as opposed to income inequality.
Okay, that's a long list of questions. You're a good professor. I started thinking about wealth inequality because this is a long time ago. I began to recognize that we really have two kinds of social policy going on. We have income support in various ways, including social insurances, but also means-tested transfers. So we have income supports for various social policy purposes. But about the middle of the 20th century, we also began to have asset building social policy operating through the tax system. And at that time, hadn't really been discussed. I mean, I think there still may be no social policy textbook that addresses the home mortgage interest tax deduction and tax benefits on retirement pensions. These are massive public expenditures, still pretty much ignored. So I looked at that and said, actually, this happened when I was a young professor, and I began to have one of these accounts that was accumulating money. So I'd never had any money before, so I was like, wow, how's this work? So I began to think about that. At the same time, I was talking with some welfare mothers, and I said to them, if you had this kind of, account, would that, could this work for you? If someone was matching your savings over here, would that be good for you? And they said, yeah, but no one will ever do that. So we created in the middle of the 20th century another kind of social policy that has excluded poor people. And disproportionately excluded people of color. So that was that insight. So the work in asset building is to put that on the table and say, look, if we're going to have asset building policy, it ought to benefit everyone. That's really the simple story on that. Now, it's true, and I think that's a positive good, and I think we're demonstrating that that's a positive good. I think you could justify that just on the grounds of fairness, right? If we're going to support shelter through the home mortgage interest tax deduction, it would be a better policy to take all of that money and give a couple $1,000s to every household in the country, rather than to give $20,000 to some households, but half the households get nothing, right? So just on the face of it, using that policy in a more fair way, I would prefer a progressive way, would be sensible. So I think that'd be hard to argue with. The fact that you're absolutely right that people are also embedded in institutions that will steal their money and will, cause many other things to happen. I think, those also have to be dealt with. But it's a separate point from, if we're going to have asset building policy, should everybody be in it? That's obvious to me. We certainly have to deal with also the financial sector and actually making some progress, slow progress. Elizabeth Warren, bless her heart, has, started a different conversation about that. I still think we have a long way to go. And with mass incarceration and police violence, I think you're talking about another set of issues that are not, they're related, of course, but these are certainly serious issues. It's just, I'm not working on it. Actually, I'm supporting my decarceration younger colleagues now, so I'm supporting that work, but I'm not working on it personally, so, yeah.
I just want to thank you for your talk. It's very appropriate in my situation. I have a personal fear of change. And just at our agency, our social worker.
Can you speak up, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for your talk, and it's very appropriate in my situation. At my agency, our social workers were just recently presented with plans for change. And I have a personal fear of change. To me, change sometimes means doing more with less. And so I'm a little nervous about our upcoming changes. And while it's a good thing and the intention is good, the plans for this change are good, we will be serving more with less. And, I'm just nervous that we're going to be spreading our services a little thin. So I'm just wondering, any advice for just personally overcoming the fear of change?
I'm not sure I heard your question clearly, but I think you were saying that your agency has getting along with fewer resources, and you're trying to make some changes, and it's wondering.
Personally, getting over the fear of change at your agency.
I'm just not hearing what that question is.
The change is doing more with less.
Yeah. Oh, the change is doing more with less. Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm totally. I don't have answers for this. I think we have to continually be creative about how we use our resources, and we have to fight for more resources. So maybe there's another point I can make here that is not just an innovation point, but more of a political point. We could do better about being at the table when resource decisions are made, whether that's locally or whether that's at our state level or at the national level. And I don't think, we can give social workers real high marks on this lately. Social workers there have been times in the past when social workers were much more engaged in the political process and the decisions about where resources would be allocated. I think, and actually Andy and I were discussing this at dinner last night, that this is a part of professional social work that is not in its strongest period during our time, and if we want, that also is going to be fundamental and essential to engage. So the lesson there is pretty simple. We have to be involved. We have to join committees. We have to take the trouble to speak about legislation or introduce legislation. We have to be there to testify. We have to get our data from our experience into the political process. So those are challenging things to do, but I think it's really fundamental to do that. I think that's true for the academics in the room also. So, because we're working in a bunch of states now, we're in the political process all the time. We're we're helping move bills through the through the Congress. We're in the political process in Washington all the time, although it's very difficult to make progress there now. So you have to take your experience and you have to take your data and you have to go out there. It requires additional work. So no easy answer for that.
Hi, I'm Richard Fernker. I'm on the faculty here, and I really liked your talk, and you talk about middle-range theories, and it's really made me think about aspects of group work, for instance, the kinds of groups that we create in social work and beyond. Yeah. And I'm thinking about there's this dimension, it seems like we're stuck as a society in terms of looking at things atomistically, individualistically. What can I get? What am I getting out of this? Yeah. And of course with groups, hopefully we form new kinds of bonds with people that maybe we haven't formed before. Yeah. And I'm thinking of unusual kinds of groups, like if you could create groups of young people who go to visit nursing homes and work with older adults and help relieve loneliness. And there's these sort of subtle psychic qualities that I think in our lives we are, at this point in our history, we are losing touch with. Yeah. People are thinking about the quality of life more than the quantity of life even. And I think this is a discussion that maybe needs to happen. And it also makes me think about this issue of, in philosophy, you have a thesis invites its antithesis. So with pragmatism, inviting a concern and maybe a nebulous concern with spirituality, for lack of a better word. People are searching for something intangible, but very important. And I think part of that has to do with the relationships, creating new kinds of relationships with other people that we don't normally interact with, and challenging ourselves, for instance. We don't want to have an intergenerational war in terms of I'm giving up these resources as an older adult so that children have more resources when I feel I've worked so hard in my life and I played by the rules, and now, I don't think that's the way to go. I do think, though, it's about trying to create greater bonds among older adults and younger people, that they really care for each other. And I don't think we have taken those kinds of opportunities as much as we should. Religious institutions try to, and some of them maybe do it well, and maybe those of us who aren't religious or who can learn maybe the best of those institutions how we might do that better. But I think that we, even as social workers, can learn from other people that might not even be our allies, in terms of caring about people who are different. And of course that's in reverse as well, that they can learn a lot from us too. But there's just something about forming different kinds of groups than we normally have that I think could be very helpful in doing this, and maybe that's part of the role of social work, and not only in agencies but outside of agencies, trying to create, for instance, with foster care children, they can connect with each other and even adopt each other as like brothers and sisters in a sense, as a different kind of a group than they might have with their ever-changing foster families. So that there's ways that sort of come to me that I think could be important, and I'm wondering if you might talk about it a little bit more.
Well, your comments are very well taken, and your ideas are good ones. I would just make a couple comments. One, I noticed that William Gordon was the first. William Gordon, one of the inventors of the person and environment formulation for social work. So it's an honor to speak in the same lecture program. He was also my colleague at Washington University for when I was younger. So. Yes, people are social. We're wired to be social. This is long evolutionary biology. So the fact that young people are no longer in touch with old people is not really the way we're wired. So we've created these artificial divisions. And in America, we have this really weird ideology about individualism. I mean, more than any other place. It's weird. It's just obvious to me that we're entwined in all kinds of social relationships all the time and taking care of all of that. But yet we have this ideology that we go it alone. Or the solutions are all quote entrepreneurial. And so it's not a good fit for I'm in favor of people being entrepreneurial and creative. I love all of that. But this is not really the essence of what people are about. People are social. And I think we even have a social psychology, and this gets to what you're speaking about. We have a social psychology that doesn't even understand that. We think social psychology is a bunch of individuals interacting. I would say that social psychology ought to be more about how your brain is social. And we haven't really arrived at that in this culture yet. So there's a lot of work to do. This is the psychology of Vygotsky in the early 20th century and some other people, and some psychology in other countries that are more kind of relational. But we've developed what I think is a kind of a psychology that's a little bit off like who we really are. So I think there's a lot of academic work to do with that, and it has all these practical implications that you're talking about.
All right, we're going to have to finish up the discussion, so let's give him another